Thank you for joining us for a very important hour and 45 minutes to help all schools in California deal with the wildfires. We have a great panel of people here to help you with resources, support, and connections. And I'd like to kick it off with introducing our executive director from ACSA, Dr. Wes Smith. And he's going to share with you some of the support that ACSA is going to do and other things. And Wes, I remember when you came up to the campfire and helped support our schools, and it meant a lot to all of us up there, seeing people face to face, and a little more difficult now with the COVID situation, but your leadership has always been right there during crisis, and we thank you. And please welcome Wes.
Hey, thanks, Tim. And wow, a big thank you to you. You've been one of the first people to step up and provide support, especially around this issue. And I remember very, very well seeing you and Mary joined at the hip, fighting that battle against the wildfire in Butte County. The support you provided, the inspiration you provided was amazing. And Tim, you and SSDA, thank you for bringing this together. To all of you on the call who are here to provide support, the California Department of Education, labor groups, other associations, thank you. But the biggest thanks really goes to our leaders in the field right now who are leading in unprecedented times without these crazy wildfires, as if we needed one more thing. And now we're struggling with the second and fourth largest wildfires in the history of California. It's at the very beginning of wildfire season, which means we're gonna have to stay the course. The message today that we want you to take away, if you take away nothing else, is you are not alone. You are not alone. We have people in counties that have done this work. Sadly, we are experts around the state in providing these resources and supports. You have Butte and Sonoma and Napa, as far north as Shasta. There are county offices all over the state with support. You've got colleagues who are there to support you. The California Department of Education has jumped in, and we'll hear from them in just a second. In years past, and they're doing it again this year, I think CDE is really at their best during a crisis, and these times are exactly that. Just so you know, at ACSA, we can provide a variety of support for you whenever you need it. We can provide crisis communication for you throughout your communities. We do that. We send a team your way, or we do it virtually. We also set up microsites for fundraisers. So let us know if your community could benefit from a fundraising microsite. We've been able to raise as much as $40,000 for a single person's home in years past. We'll do that same thing for you. Edgar Zazueta is on this call. Legislatively, his team can help you with relief here in the state and at the federal level with regards to funding, instructional minutes, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're not alone. You have allies. SSDA is here to support you. ACSA is here to support you. Labor is ready to support as well with their resources. And with that note, let me introduce another group that is there to support you. I've mentioned the California Department of Education Superintendent. Tony Thurmond is on the line. As I said, I think they're at their best in a crisis, and he steps up. He's yet again stepping up. So Tony, welcome, and the mic is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Tim Taylor, Superintendent Taylor. To all of you who are on the call, thank you to all the presenters and to all who've organized today's call. If you're on today's call, obviously you've been impacted by wildfire. And today is an opportunity for us to really talk about how we can help and to listen to those who unfortunately have been through this all too often, who've become experts on how to manage, respond, and prepare for future crises. As Wes points out, we find ourselves still in wildfire season, and we know that there's more. But for now, I just want to say that our hearts go out to all those who've been impacted by these fires, to those in your communities who've lost loved ones, to those who've lost homes, in these very, very difficult times that were already the most challenging times that we might ever face in our lifetime. My goodness, a worldwide pandemic. And on top of it, as every school in our state, practically every school in our state opens in distance learning, that we find thousands of students in evacuation zones. We never imagined that that might be the case, but sadly, it's where we find ourselves. Just know that we at the California Department of Education pledge our support to you in any way that we can be helpful. Obviously, we're working very closely with county superintendents on waivers. The J13A waiver will be the one that we'll probably talk the most about. We want you to know that your funding will be held harmless, and we don't want you worrying about paperwork requirements. Whatever you need a waiver around meals, we want you to know that that will be provided. We will work with you on whatever it is that you need. Our job is to listen and to help. And so today we'll listen to hear how you want more help. We've been leaning in already with many of the county superintendents who've been talking about how to mobilize in your area. We want to hear from many of our district leaders. I want to thank the Small Schools Superintendents Association and CSEA, ACSA, CASBO, and CSBA for putting this on. And most importantly, for presenting the opportunity for you to hear from peers who've been through this. I'm looking forward to the remarks from Steve Harrington and Mary Sakuma. They've been through this and they've been so gracious, and they're dealing with this now. And even as they deal with wildfire again, they're prepared to share some examples of ways that they can be helpful. I want to thank them for that. And I want to thank all those who will be sharing their examples. Our nation right now is gripped by the impacts of the pandemic, by dealing with issues around racial injustice and social injustice. Our state and our nation need healing. There's so many things that are unknown at this time, but one thing that is known is that we have to stand together and work together to continue to manage getting through all of these challenges. I am incredibly inspired by the resilience of our students, our educators, our administrators, and our families. And we stand with you as we move forward together. Thank you for being California strong, and know that the California Department of Education stands with you as we continue to move through these challenging times.
Tony, thanks so much. I'll never forget when you came up during the campfire. It was the first day back for the kids, and I couldn't find you. I thought maybe you were taking a call, but you were serving food to the kids for breakfast, and I thought that's exactly what we need. It was good to see the U.S. Department of Ag just announced that they're going to fund meals for all kids through December 31st this morning. So good timing as we deal with all these crises. One other thing for you is as the leader of all these issues, we really appreciate you constantly communicating, doing the best you can with all these changes. We talked about the wildfires season really just starting after we dealt with 1,200 fires already. I think the support that we get from CDE is imperative to help these districts. And thank you so much for taking up the pressure and relief with the J13, because I think that's the first thing board members and people worry about is how we can stay solvent when we lost all these homes. So thank you very much. And thanks for being here this morning and supporting the schools.
Jim, I should say too, we've got two great leaders from CDE who are going to be on the entire call to go through a little bit more about J13 and other kinds of, disaster support. Lisa Constancio, she's one of our deputy superintendents. She's tremendously dedicated and has great experience here. And Juan Morales, who oversees our facilities, but has been really one of our point people on dealing with response to disaster and how do we prepare for disaster. They're both going to go through a lot of the specifics, and we're all available to answer any questions that anyone has on this call.
Great, thank you so much, really appreciate it. Well, we're going to kick it over to really the person who's probably been through the most wildfires in the history of, of education. That's Dr. Steve Harrington from Sonoma. And Steve, Mary and I thank you from the bottom of our heart. I think the best call we made was calling your cabinet during the midst of our third or fourth day. We were totally lost, and your support and knowledge in this area is second to none, and it very much helped us get back on our feet. So we're looking forward to having you impart your support and knowledge. Having talked to both Monterey and Santa Cruz County Soups the other day, I highly encourage them to call you or Mary and keep in their lane because it gets very scattered for them. So Steve, welcome. Thanks for being here this morning, and hope you're safe over there in Sonoma.
Thank you, Tim. We're still fighting our fire. It's about 40% contained, but since 2017, we seem to always be having a fire in our county that's been at catastrophic levels. The first fire in California history in 2017, which was the largest magnitude fire and property damage fire, was in Sonoma. It destroyed 6,000 homes. 4 schools were partially burned, 2 were destroyed, and we had approximately 50,000 people evacuated. After that fire, which was known as the Tubbs Fire, we became experts in dealing with a lot of situations. I look at one and realize how much the state California Department of Education helped us go through the bureaucracy. The biggest issue we had to do was reoccupation, and no one would take on the responsibility of saying what to do to reoccupy, because the person that does that assumes liability. And so that's a whole other issue. But right now, and then that was 2017. In 2018, we had to deal with floods and evacuating students in the middle of the day, 12,000 of them, followed by the Tubbs, followed by your fire, which happened to be so gracious to deposit all the smoke from the Paradise Fire into Sonoma. And we were closed for several weeks due to air quality issues from your fire. And when the wind blew, it blew south, and all of a sudden there was a greater uproar for what are the air quality control standards for smoke. Well, we took that on as well and worked with the California Department of Education and the state legislature, and I'll share that in a minute, on air quality control and how you set those standards up. And then, of course, last year we had the Kincaid Fire and had a mass evacuation of 200,000 residents and closed schools for 4 weeks because we had no teaching staff, we had no schools open. So we've been through this multiple times. And then when this year started, who would have thought we would have had another fire the first week of school, along with the pandemic. So we've been dealing with fires, and I would like to suggest to everyone that through their county office or through the association, because I see on this agenda it's a hyperlink, this document, which is called the Emergency Recovery Guide, was put out by the California School Counties Association, and in it, it tells you what to do before an emergency, what to do during an emergency, what to do after emergency. All the documents you will need if you are a federal emergency disaster fire are in here, and how to document that. It tells you what your county office will do. It tells you what the role of the district will be. It will tell you the role of the CDE and what they will do. So if you don't have this document, I strongly urge you to download this document because it will guide you through the process. The other document is during a fire, you have air quality and air quality control issues. And last 2018, we produced with the California County Superintendent Association and the ACSA, as well as the California Department of Education, Get Smart About Smoke, because smoke is the next deadliest issue that you're going to have to deal with. And if it's not, you don't have a fire in your county, but you will have smoke in your county. And then you will be pressured on to close schools. When do you close schools? What's the air quality standard? Well, I learned something from our fires is that there are 80 air quality control boards in the state of California. And some counties like Sonoma are divided in half. And some counties are divided in 4s. So what standard do you use? And how do you set that up? Well, it tells you in this document, which is also hyperlinked to this agenda, the process a county goes through. County health will not make a determination on air quality because that's assigned to the Air Quality Control Board. So once you establish your standards with your Air Quality Control Board, superintendents can make the call to close school, as well as when it snows, you know when to close school, or when it floods, you know when to close schools. Now we have air standards produced by the California Department of Education, where you work with your Air Quality Control Board to set the standards. And I strongly recommend that document as well. The other thing I told Tim I wanted to talk about is trauma. Juvenile trauma is real. Adult trauma is real from these fires. Your staffs are hurting. Your children are hurting. And when we dealt with our first fire, and then when the Paradise had their fire and the smoke came here, we had children go into trauma because they thought their county was on fire again. There are some federal and state grants, and I want to thank the CDE for aligning us with those grants. We have trauma support counselors that we have now made available to Santa Cruz County, Solano County, and Napa County. Through that grant, we've decided that they're not just serving our students, they're serving California students. So our counselors are training the counselor networks in those counties on how to deal with student and family and staff trauma. And staff deal with the trauma, and then they've got to go back to work. And that's really a stressor. So look at those things. And if you need help, please reach out, because we're here to help you. The other thing is, every district should develop a crisis communication plan. And I believe that the CDE has some very skilled communications staffers that would help you put this communication plan together, as well as the California the Association for Public, well, basically PR, the Public Relations Group, CalSPRA, will help you with this. We have one of these. Any district that wants it can have it, but it basically outlines what you should do or how you should do your communications plan within your district. Parents need to know. And the other thing I want to highlight to you is the fact that people will want to make donations. And one of the things I learned from other situations in crisis, you need to have a channel for foundations to collect. We have 54 or 64 foundations in our county, but we all united into one depository. So all the money went through one credit union. It was divided into education, social services. So all the money went through one agency, was accounted by one agency, went into the categories for those agencies. And then we had an advisory board that reviewed the requests in each of those areas. So when it was for home and supplies, they reviewed those requests. With United Way was on that board along with the County Office of Education. If it was for educational purposes, we looked at it and we responded as the lead agent for that and took care of those funds. We collected over $2.5 million. Most of those funds went into trauma support for children and trauma support for staff, because that's where we figured our long-term impact needed to be. We're currently collecting money under these fires, but we've learned from the process. Many people have good hearts, and if another person, Mary and I joke about this, I have backpacks. I still have backpacks sent to me from Las Vegas. I don't need backpacks. In fact, when the backpacks came from Las Vegas, they also came with mice in them in the situation. So please, I always tell people, money does the most impact. And secondly, if you're going to make a donation, just don't make it to the football team. Don't make it to the band. Make it for students. Because remember, there are many kids who don't participate in football, who don't participate in band. And when you segregate the funds, those kids get cut out. So we really advocated for all donations go to students. Yes, the Raiders gave us money, but it wasn't just for football. It was for all students. And so did the 49ers. So those funds came in and we distributed them equitably to all students in need. So I advise you to set up your systems, divide up your cabinet, assign duties and responsibilities, because you can't take it all on. And I will tell you, based on my military training as an officer, the one thing I told him, calm is control. If you can remain calm in the face of the greatest adversity, you are in control of the situation. And that's what needs to be reassured. This current fire had 7 of our districts down out of our 40 school districts in Sonoma County. So we're working it through right now. I think we'll get the other one back online today because they're letting the people move back into Guerneville. But those are the things you need to keep in mind as you go through this process. Do not be afraid to ask. Do not be afraid to call. We are here to help every one of us. My responsibility isn't just to the students of Sonoma County, it's to all the students that we serve as a teacher, as an educator. And I told that to Tim. You know, you're superintendent of a county. The private schools need your help just as much as the public schools, and we brought them all in. And we secured a FEMA rep for our county because the paperwork is going to be horrendous if you have to make a claim for a burnt school. So Mary's been through it most recently, and I'll let you, Tim, turn it over to Mary.
Yeah, Steve, before we do that, I'd like to ask you just a couple of follow-up questions because we're still pretty much in the recovery stage, right? We haven't started to restore things. Can you go back to the mental health, emotional trauma, especially in the era of COVID? I found when I watched a Pacific Elementary address their community, it's not face-to-face. You know, I think that's part of the recovery that you guys did so well, where you were able to come together and hug each other, and the counselors were able to really look people in the eye. And I think some of us hurry coming back because the teachers, they want to get back to see their kids. Any suggestions on monitoring that part of it? Because you're right, the adult trauma, you can't have victims teaching victims. Yet we're all anxious to get them back because it's quote unquote just distance learning. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, we haven't done the trauma impact training right now because we're not back in our schools. So we haven't dealt with the COVID and the distance learning criteria as much. But I will tell you that it's important that you let people come back when they do come back to tell their story to each other, to the colleagues. And it's important too to realize that you can't restart. You have to. You're going to lose at least 5% of your population. I think Lisa will look at if she looks at our statistics and Mario looks at her statistics, our population hasn't come back. And that's part of the trauma. We have tracked our students out to other counties just to see where they are. They're fire victims in those counties. That's part of our grant responsibilities. But to Tim, I can't tell you other than the personal contact is really essential. And so what we're doing right now with many of our fire traumas, because remember that some of these communities are multiple trauma victims, we're doing one-on-one. We're doing one-on-one with those families that are right now. That's different from before. We could do group trauma training, but that's where we are. We haven't really honed that down yet doing COVID. And I know that Santa Cruz County called me yesterday to talk about how do you go about doing trauma in a COVID situation. And we're looking at that our staff is looking at how they can best teach and do that. So I'm sorry I can't give you a clear answer on COVID, right. But the trauma it has a sustaining effect. When I went back to Washington, D.C., I told the House of Representatives Subcommittee on Education that a one-year grant in trauma, which is what you get with FEMA, doesn't have the impact. You needs to at least be 3 or more years because those students are hurting every time that anniversary comes around. Anyway, and of course now they're talking about FEMA reimbursement at 90%. FEMA reimbursement is currently at 75%. A bill was introduced to make it 90%, and I think that's very good. I would tell your district superintendents, track everything, have job descriptions for everybody. FEMA will need to see all that. You'll have to do all sorts of paperwork. Once again, all the forms are in this book, so you can find them, and it tells you what to do and how to do it, and then make your claims. But if you don't have a line of control on who said what to whom, and it has to come from either your Cal OES or your local OES, if there's no training back, the district doesn't get reimbursed, and that happened to us. Our districts did not get reimbursed for shelter-in-place centers. Our high schools didn't get reimbursed for the food they spent, and that's because no one could track back to Cal OES who set up those emergency offers. I know I got the call at 1 o'clock in the morning to open the high schools. So these are things, and There's,
Steve,
you know,
Steve, on that same note, your decision making on air quality, I thought, really helped guide a lot of us. And again, I think the air quality smoke that goes downhill or east or west or north infiltrates school systems, filtering systems. So a lot of schools say, well, the air looks good outside. And I remember you told me you got to get specialists to go inside the schools to look at that. So can you just talk a little bit more about that? I've got a ton of calls about this one area.
Well, first of all, we learned a lot of things I learned more about air filters than I need to know.
Yeah.
But the one thing is, you don't put people will sell you an air filter, and they will come and they will want to clean up your school setting. But if they're not FEMA approved, you've got to be careful of that if you're going to ask for FEMA reimbursement. But the air filtering systems and Juan can talk to a little bit about this too, of the portables, is not at the same caliber as our new schools. The air quality control built in the new school situations are high standard. The older schools have older filtration systems. Replacing them with the wrong type of filters burns up the system. We've had schools go down because they put these high quality air filters in, but they overheated the system, or they didn't get enough air through the old system. So you have to look at it carefully, because you have to replace your air filter system. And we have a major ballot initiative to do for our school districts to upgrade their filtering systems just because of the fires. And of course, some of those schools are currently going through the retrofit for that right now. But you need to really look at the air filtration system in your schools. Some of our schools are over 40 years old. I know that happened to Mary in some of her schools. And putting the wrong filters in then burns up the system, and then you have another expense to deal with. So I tell superintendents, go cautiously. And remember, you can't go back into a school until it's totally wiped down. You can't go back into a school until you do an air quality test control. You can't go back into a school until you've replaced all the air filters. So all of those things are prerequisites to reoccupation.
Good advice, Steve. And the last one, just to thank you again for all your support to all the different schools throughout California. I want to say, I remember you told me something, that when the campfire smoke came over to your area, PTSD started kicking in right away. And I go, why would that happen, right? So when the ash fell here from the Nevada, and I'm here in Sacramento, Solano fire and Napa, it came in my backyard, and I started trembling. And I felt what you talked about. So for all of us that have had fires in our areas, this will continue for years, as you well pointed out to us a couple years ago. So again, thanks for all your work. Anybody needs to contact Steve, his staff jumps on it right away. So Steve, thanks so much, and appreciate all your input again.
You're welcome.
We're going to switch over to Butte County, and Mary Sakuma and her team. Tad Alexander's here, and Steve Monahan. And Mary, thanks for being here again. I think what we learned from Sonoma and Shasta, you've taken to another level, and all the great work you've done, not only with the campfire, but the other fires up there. And so welcome, and good morning to you.
Good morning, Tim, and thank you very much. I want to first say many thanks to Tony Thurmond for being here and kicking this off for us. It's really an honor to have you here, and we appreciate your time. Also, many thanks to Tim Taylor at SSDA, Smith at ACSA, and of course, all of the incredible colleagues who are on this call today. Dr. Harrington, again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for being there for us when we needed you. Really appreciate it, and always will remember that. So I'm here today joined by my colleagues, Tad Alexander, who is Associate Superintendent at Butte County Office of Education, as well as Steve Monahan, our Senior Director of IT. Here's some of the things that we're going to talk about today. I'll spend 5 minutes of my time talking with you a little bit about the idea of setting up a countywide school communications command center. And I also want to talk with you a little bit about some of the areas that people tend to forget about, or maybe not realize the importance of addressing. And that would be issues around the support of homeless and foster youth, Remembering that child development programs and services and childcare are going to be big issues in communities that are impacted by fire. Of course, there are always HR considerations. The support of our staff is extremely important during these times. And further, the continuity of operations, which would include everything from payroll to IT to other facilities and issues. So when Tad comes on, he'll be talking about FEMA paperwork and procurement, as well as issues around foods and donations. And then Steve will close us out talking about some of the IT considerations. So let me begin by talking a little bit about the importance of establishing some kind of central county-wide communications hub. We literally called ours the hub. And I want to do a special shout out to Tom DeLapp of Communications Resources for Schools, as well as Kendra Britt, who is on today, and you'll hear from her later, and many others from around the state, people who came to us and said, let us help you establish your communication center, let us help you kind of show the way, because this is such an enormous undertaking. So many thanks to them. That was a huge piece of what we did. But from an internal aspect, we needed a way and some kind of systematic approach to doing briefings twice a day. And the purpose of those briefings were twofold. First were to communicate with one another as to what was taking place during that day and what our goals were trying to accomplish during the day. And the second, and probably the most important, was establishing a systematic way to communicate the unmet needs in our county up the chain of command. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of knowing how to do that. We were very, very fortunate to have somebody from CalOES by the name of Tom Graham, who was embedded with us at our communications hub. And he really helped us formulate our communications so that it was understood at all different levels and all different types of agencies. And as you know, we in schools have our own way of communicating, but in the emergency response world and emergency recovery through CalOES and FEMA and other agencies, they have their own way of communicating as well. So we sort of had to learn their language. I know that later in today's webinar, Tom Taylor will be closing us out from Paradise Unified, and he can really speak to what that's like from the district perspective. So I'll look forward to hearing from Tom about that. One of the pieces that is also really important, of course, is your communication with your internal stakeholders in your own districts and county offices, as well as the external stakeholders of your parents, your family, and your community. And one of the things that we did at the Communications Hub every day is established a sort of theme for the day. What were we going to focus on in regard to that day's communication? And we developed that theme based on what districts and charters and private schools were telling us, as well as what we knew that we were working on that we felt like the community needed to know about. And so we would have at least once a day, we had some kind of press release. I was also asked each evening to be present at the Incident Command Center for CAL FIRE. And my role there was occasionally to have some talking points to speak as part of the press briefing. But more than anything, I was asked to be there to answer questions as they came up about schools. You can imagine that communities are always wanting to know what's happening with their schools, and that's just really important. And so my comments and always revolved around whatever that theme was. And again, assuring the public that we were on it, that we had things under control, that we were really staying focused on reuniting our students with their teachers as soon as possible and as soon as it was safe to do so. Okay, and then I'd just like to note that your continuity of operations plan is critically important. Steve Monahan here in just a moment is going to talk about that from the IT perspective. But don't forget, the single most important thing that people begin to worry about in a crisis is, are they going to get paid? And it's really important. Our teachers, our classified staff, they need to have our assurance that we have the capacity to do that and that we'll continue to support them. And so it's always a good idea. We learned this through the Ortville Dam evacuation. We learned it during the Camp Fire and multiple other incidents. Always, from the county office perspective especially, have an alternative place to do your accounting, to your checks, all of those operations. You need to have redundant systems in place. In regard to our homeless and foster youth, just a reminder that this is really when the people who work in that area for your county offices and school districts, they have a lot of expertise there. And of course, these are our most at-risk students who need support and your help. Also important to remember, and oftentimes is overlooked, is we have our 0 to 5 population that are going to need help. Here in Butte County, as a result of the Camp Fire and now even worse during the pandemic, really the inventory and access to quality childcare is at risk. And so very, very important to provide as many supports as you possibly can in that area. All right. Well, I know our time is short, so at this time, I would like to turn things over to Associate Superintendent Tad Alexander from Butte County Office of Education. Tad's going to talk with you about FEMA, procurement, foods and donations. Tad?
Thanks, Mary. So as Dr. Harrington had mentioned, there now is a manual that people can reference that didn't exist when we went through our largest evacuation, the Camp Fire, and now that's out there, and I think it's a great resource for folks. There's a lot of things pulled together in one area. So I'm not going to hit all those details along the way. It'll be a good reference point. But I do want to take a couple of broad brush strokes at things and kind of set some perspectives for folks. If you have a state emergency declared or a federal emergency declared, that changes the process in which you'll do procurement. And the reason that that's important is as we move forward, we want to solve a bunch of problems for our students. And if you don't do it in the right way, getting reimbursed later is going to be difficult. So be aware whether you have a state emergency declared or a federal emergency declared, because that will change the process. And one of the other important parts of that is as you go through the process is the relationships you will have with different agencies. As I go through, I'm going to talk about the we, and the we I'll be talking about is, Paradise Unified, working with them or one of our other districts that was needing some support. Working with CDE, super important. Working with CalOES, that is important, and FEMA, because we were declared a federal emergency. That's the we I'll be talking about as I give you a couple examples moving forward. And I think one of the most important things that come across as we go around and talk to people about this is in education, we're used to having our dollars assigned to us for specific tasks. This funding is to accomplish this. When you're in an emergency and we're trying to recover, you have to, and it feels weird for CBOs and superintendents, but you have to spend the money to get started on the recovery, and then you're hoping that you're going to be able to recover those dollars later. And it feels uncomfortable, but the sooner you get over that and start the process moving forward, the quicker you're going to have recovery in your area. I see all the head nodding because everybody who's been there is well aware of it. One of the other examples I'd like to give you of the partnerships that are really important, reference back to the Field Act, and we worked quite a bit with Juan's office on a lot of this. We were able to put, this is one of my favorite parts of the story, we were able to pull together with all our partnerships to put 11 portables on 2 campuses in 14 days with Christmas and rain in between. And that was because we were able to work with CDE, we were able to work with CalOES, we were able to work with our local contractors, we were able to work with PG&E. I mean, you run down the list and we had to coordinate a lot of efforts, but everybody is willing to help. And that's going to be the same for you folks as well. Know that people are out there and they want to help. They're going to want to bring you donations. A little bit of that is in the manual as well. The part on that I always share that's important to remember along with the backpacks is they're giving from their heart and they mean well. And if you can focus that meaning well in the direction that's useful for you, that's probably going to be your best bet. But they're all going to want to know where it went, so do make sure you track it and you put some numbers to it. And I'd even go as far to say I recommend you pull together a team or a single individual to track those donations. Last thing I'm going to touch on real quick is food. So one thing we did come across and realize is that if people are evacuating to hotels or their grandma's bedroom or or wherever they're at, they typically don't have pantries anymore, especially if you're in a hotel. And so the timing in between meals is significant. And so having food available between those times was something we identified as a need. And so be aware that during an evacuation, during an emergency, a disaster, being able to feed your students and take care of the community makes a big difference, and they're depending on us. In rural situations, in small school districts, you'll find that the school is the center of the community. And so getting the school up and going actually makes a big difference for the overall recovery of the whole community. Other than that, we mentioned earlier, keep track of your costs. Set up local resource codes. I don't want to go too far into the weeds on that, but going backwards is not fun in any way whatsoever. So highly recommend that you just start keeping track of those things now. You can't have enough detail when it comes to the end and FEMA wants to reimburse you. They're happy to give you the money, but you need to prove that you spent it on what you said. So just start that process soon and don't be afraid to track it. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve Monahan, who will talk about our connectivity and our IT issues and how to be prepared for an emergency. Steve?
Cool, thank you, Tad. Hi, everybody. I'm just here to give you a Cliff's Note version of the technology side of recovery. Over these past 2 years, myself, along with the Technology Steering Committee, which is a subcommittee of CSEA, have been working on disaster recovery documentation and materials. And there's actually a link in the chat. It says disaster recovery resources. If you were to click there, there's a wide array of resources for not only technology individuals, but also those who districts or COEs that don't have a large tech team or any techs for that matter. These documents are designed to give you some guidance on how do I set up backups? How do I establish internet services? What type of generators do we need that'll work with our technology? And one of the most important documents that we've created through this Technology Steering Committee is a checklist. Now, this checklist has been ran through numerous times over this last couple of years, and obviously used real-world experience of how to prepare in case a disaster does hit. And it doesn't have to be fire-related. It could be flood. It could be any pandemic for that matter. The document is very useful, and I encourage everybody to take a look and go over it and also ask questions. Ask your neighboring COEs. Some of the situations that we got into with the Camp Fire was not only were some of the schools destroyed or inaccessible, but internet connectivity was pretty much gone from a big part of the community due to the towers where internet runs through burned down, and that includes cell service. So we were without anything. Some of the first gotchas you might want to think about when it comes to disaster and preparing is, where's your emergency processes stored? Are they in the cloud? You have them in a binder in your office, in a safe? Where's that location? For us at Butte County Office of Ed, and this is encouraged through all other COEs, is to store it in the cloud, but in a safe location where only select individuals have access, and then test that access before a disaster hits. Also, know what accounts get you into certain critical components, meaning, do you have the accounts to get into your emergency management system? Do you have accounts to get into your backup systems? To websites for messaging. The last thing you want, and we've seen this firsthand, is if there's an emergency that does happen, how do you contact students and their parents to let them know their children are safe or they've been evacuated? Well, if someone doesn't have the account credentials for that emergency management system, that's a problem right there. So be prepared. One thing I also encourage is just backups in general. Have you tested them? And again, I know individuals on this call are not all technical, but it's pretty straightforward question that you can ask your tech team. Do we have backups? When's the last time they were tested? Do we have an offsite backup? That's more important than ever in the state of California. You know, we have so many resources in California. Our county office of eds, we're pretty close by districts. A lot of these districts and county office of eds do have the infrastructure to host your offsite backups. Again, you do not want your primary facility going down. And if you do, where's your data at? Mary had mentioned we set up the hub, Emergency Operations Center. So do you have adequate supplies for that? Do you have adequate wireless access points? Do you have network switches, printers, etc.? Because when an Emergency Operations Center is set up, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's your own organization that's going to be sitting there, that's going to be doing the work. You could have individuals, guests per se, coming from all over the state. Tony was around our office. We had all kinds of people, so you got to be prepared. You do have adequate bandwidth in the Emergency Operations Center? Do you have rooms to set up live broadcast? Just questions you need to ask yourself and be prepared for. Again, Cliff Note version. With the pandemic, obviously there's site supplies that you'll need, and even more so, hygienic supplies, which came in very handy for us during the campfire recovery efforts, but even more so now. Hand sanitizers, disinfectant wipes, garbage bags, tools were essential when we had to go and recover servers in locations that had no power, no lighting, smoke damage, etc. You don't have a lot of time to pull out servers. I mean, at one point we used scissors to cut network cabling to pull out critical servers, financial systems, student information systems, you name it. If it was important, we pulled it. So having the resources available, normally a kit, wherever you store that kit, is just a safe location. Also batteries, flashlights, headlamps in particular, regardless of disaster, come in very handy. Outside of that, I would just say try to prepare as much as you possible, as much as you can, and reference the documents that others have put forth already. Don't reinvent the wheel when it comes to recovering technology and preparing for technology. Again, there's a wide array of documents out there that have been vetted by numerous county office eds across the state. And we finally have, I would say, a relevant document that you can leverage to create or get started. Now, you don't necessarily need a disaster recovery plan. Is it that important? Yes, but having a checklist and having an understanding of how to initiate these documents is very important. And last but not least, regardless if you're in technology or not, establish a call tree. I cannot stress the fact that having a call tree of specific individuals in technology or not, it is vital. When a disaster hits, you don't know if employee A is going to be available, so you might have to call upon employee B, etc. That is vital to the recovery efforts of a disaster and preparation. And that's all I have.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, since you're still on, Mary, I got a couple questions for you and Ted too. But Steve,
Sure.
in the era of COVID and distance learning, I thought you did a really good job. People out of their goodness of their heart want to donate things. And as Steve says, gift cards or cash are best. But my neighbor donated remember he donated that 286 computer. And I brought it up to you guys, and obviously that's not, we put it, I think, in our history tech museum up there. But you got to say no to some of these donations, because it's more of a hindrance than a help. And I think you were responsible for that. So I know there's a foundation, but when people bring up laptops and everything, saying no is an important part of your job.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tim. A lot of the donations, if they are computer related or anything, we still have to have a security mindset for one. And we also have to think of the time it would take to set this device up for a student and give it out. If either it doesn't, if it's not secure, or we think it's a device that can actually maliciously attack the network, that's a no-go. And also the fact that if it is older, you know, giving it to a student that they're going to struggle with and we don't have the support during a disaster to help out with, that's a big no-no. So in terms of donations and everything, we went particularly with a lot to our resellers, and in a disaster, in a crisis situation, they are more than happy to help out and provide donations on computers. Surface Pros, for example, were something that we received, but they're all the same standard model, and we were able to get over 200 of them set up for Paradise Unified, as well as some other surrounding districts and charters to get those out. So standardization, security, and obviously a model that we can work with and support is important.
Great. Hey, Mary, I want to go back to the payroll issue and just the support issue. People will not get this work done without bringing in some fresh faces and some retired people or people to help. Tell us, I know both Paradise and Butte brought in some people to help get this FEMA paperwork together and HR and some other stuff. So can you reiterate that for me?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, you know, we have incredible resources in our retirees, and I'll give one example of that. We continue to have fire recovery counselors who are working with us, just as Dr. Harrington mentioned. You know, the trauma that people feel, that our staff are feeling, that our students are feeling, that does not go away when a year magically comes to an end. It's an ongoing thing. And we're so very grateful to all of the retirees who came in to help us in a variety of ways. One of the things that we, in addition to the fire recovery counselors, is we worked with a number of retired administrators and other retirees who had particular expertise in certain areas and who were able to support and coach various members of our organization, or even take on specific projects. I know that one of the retirees that we hired, we sent directly over to Paradise Unified, and he worked with Paradise Unified for close to a year, supporting them in doing research about alternative facilities and so forth. So, and right now, with our small district that was very impacted, a small single school district, they still have one of our consultants working with them, helping them with the water system recovery project. And of course, that is now turned over to their funds and their resources, but the county office helped find the right person to match for that job. So always tapping the wealth of expertise that's out there in all of our retirees when the time is, when it's needed.
Yeah, and I think we learned that from the CAL FIRE, right? They bring in fresh people who haven't lost their home, who are trained to come in and help. And educators, we try to do it all ourselves, and I think it's important to bring in people that are just there to support you to get the work done, because it's tremendous.
Absolutely.
Mary, one other thing, and I think Steve Harrington brought this up initially, the most important person besides, of course, we always think the county soup is your homeless and foster director, because everyone who's evacuated or lost their home now is homeless, and getting that support. And the tricky thing was families now have been displaced, and we're dealing with this over in Santa Cruz already. The parents want to go to another district or do this, and the other district says this, but the homeless person has to talk about the federal law that's involved with now being homeless and getting those kids qualified for those extra services. I think along with your central command center, I thought the support that was provided in that world to make sure kids continue schooling by your foster director was fantastic.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah.
Really well done. And I think if anybody needs help on that, to give Steve or Mary a call. That's really important stuff. To tell you the truth, I don't think they'd gotten on that because they're still in the recovery stage. But we need to support them, because I remember Steve told us, man, the most important person is that person. And as a leader, the county soups have to protect them, because they're doing tough work to get kids back in new schools.
Yeah, and the thing that I would like to add is this is such an emotional time for families and for our staff and our children and for all of us. And just really important to, and this is a lesson learned, I don't know if Tom will be talking about this, but, you know, of course, Paradise Unified and Golden Feather Union Elementary School District, you know, they were looking down a very serious issue of losing their entire district. And so they really needed messaging about reuniting students with their teachers. That's where the relationships are, right? And at the same time, we had to balance that message by assuring families that had to relocate to Los Angeles or Idaho or somewhere else that they did have a legal right to enroll in the schools where they were living until such time as they were able to return. So it's a very difficult balance of communication, but a really important one.
Right. And then for all of you, Tad Tad and Steve's department, that FEMA stuff is complicated. Get help. Call them and get help. You're talking about millions of dollars at stake if you don't do it correctly. And you have to have the right mindset team to do that work. I think if you're a superintendent principal, if you think you're going to take that on yourself, you're not going to do a good job. Get help and call Tad, call Steve's office. Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up with Mary's comment as it relates to homeless children and McKinney event. One of the things that I had to re-educate my colleague superintendents in this county that were basic aid or direct funded districts. They were resistant because, you know, that changes the numbers by allowing other students in, and I would fall out of basic aid and all the other situations. As far as I was concerned, I said, you serve all students. There is no basic aid in this situation. When your county's hurting, I think Mary did the same thing. You have to accept these students. Don't put them through any more stress than is necessary. So if there are basic aid counties listening, remember, there is no exclusion for students that are victims of fire. Thank you. Great, Steve.
Yeah, that's a super important point, and we are dealing with some basic aid counties down there. So well put. Hey, Butte County, thanks again for everything. You guys are fantastic. And Mary, I did want to say one more thing. I'm sorry. Tony Thurmond just told us that he's going to make sure that they don't lose their revenue that they had going into the fire. People out there that are in charge of payroll in accounting, pay your people. You may have some people on timesheet. You're not going to lose your revenue, so make sure you don't not pay people, even if they're timesheeted. Do the right thing and treat people. Don't cause more stress on the people themselves. That's why CD is protecting your funding, so you keep people funded and employed, and keep things sane for them also. Because I know it gets complicated, but pay people even throughout your payroll system, and Mary's team did a great job getting those paychecks out. Okay, we're going to switch gears and head over to CDE. We got Juan. Hey, Juan, good to see you this morning. Hey, Lisa.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Being here and looking forward to hearing from you guys. And I know you guys are doing so much work, and thanks for the support with all the wildfires in addition to everything else.
Thank you very much for having us, Tim. I'm going to get started. My name, as you mentioned, Lisa Constancio. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of the Operations and Administration Branch. And with me is Juan Morales, who is our Director of School Facilities and Transportation Services. And he really is our lead on emergency services and emergency preparedness for the department. And as several of you have already mentioned, he is a tremendous resource, and we will continue to be a resource to each of you as we continue to work through the emergencies that we continue to face throughout the state. So I first want to talk a little bit about our partnership with CalOES. So we are what we call activated by the State Operations Center every time there is an emergency. This year has been different because of the COVID pandemic. We have been activated since March. So we have been working with CalOES on COVID response up until recently, where we are now working with them to provide information on COVID response that our districts and our counties are dealing with, and also now with the wildfires. So we participate in a unified coordination group call every morning. Typically this is 7 days a week, where we are basically the voice of the schools. CDE is the schools task force. So we play a leadership role here for joint state and federal school task forces as well. But one of our main roles is really to elevate the needs of our school communities. So that is one vital role that we play in our partnership with Cal OES. In terms of supporting our LEAs, we elevate resources that you all need and that you all report to us as needs for you. And then we also continue to provide them with data. They always want to know what's happening at the local level. So we always partner typically with our county superintendents. This year we have leaned a lot on CSEA and our county soups to really help us get this data up to Cal OES and up to the state level so that they understand what's happening locally. We also have staff in our team that's been working with Cal OES to overlay GIS mapping systems so that we can identify the schools in the evacuation zones and then work with each of you and our county superintendents to then determine which of those schools may potentially then be affected and are closed. So we look at open and closed schools, we look at instructional programs, and we're also looking to see if there's any schools that have been damaged or, unfortunately destroyed. So we do a lot of work also with CAL FIRE. They tend to be the boots on the ground initially to let us know what's happening, and then we're coordinating that back with each of the county soups to verify that information. So we're looking at the status of program sites, early ed, early learning and expanded learning. And then as was mentioned earlier too, we're looking at the status of the students, those that are displaced and those that are homeless. And we really do report on a daily basis back to the State Operations Center, whatever updated information we may have around wildfires. And then also, we are also doing COVID response, as I mentioned. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Juan to take the lead here.
Good morning, everyone. Every time we talk about emergencies and disasters, we always take the time to stress the importance of preparedness. We know that many of you are currently impacted, but some of you may not. And it's always really important to be prepared. Take a look at your comprehensive school safety plan. Make sure it's updated. A very important critical step is designating an LEA emergency coordinator. If you don't have one, you should do that. They're going to help you with many things, like it's just been talked about, in terms of accepting donations, to managing grants and other funding applications. In fact, what we've been hearing in other disasters is that you're going to probably need a deep bench here because you're going to need assistance from a lot of other people, but having somebody as a point is very important. Also critically important is building the contacts and relationships with your local emergency operations center. Super critical to do this in advance of a disaster. If you can, get to know who the school liaison is going to be at the county EOC. You're going to be working very closely with them. And this is how you're going to start to elevate the unmet needs that has been talked about. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that shortly, but make sure that you establish those contacts, get their cell phone numbers, know who it is so you know when to contact them during an emergency. Something that others may have is sample emergency resolutions for your school boards to be able to go out to bid during emergencies and not have to go through the competitive bid process and help you execute contracts faster. Documentation, as has been mentioned, keeping records is very critical, and having access to those records outside of your campus is going to be very helpful because you may not have access to your campus. It may be damaged or destroyed. And keeping information about, all of the, the impacts, school closures, number of homes lost, the student mobility we talked about, because students may be coming and going to other districts, and focus on all of your programs too, please. Childcare, after school nutrition, and making sure that you keep all this information because it could prove to be very, very helpful for seeking reimbursement from state and federal funding. Another tip that we've been hearing is that this has helped some other districts in other disasters is, if you can, take an inventory of school facilities. Taking pictures before to determine the condition is something that we heard could have been very helpful to some districts when they were working with their insurance providers to be able to get funding and rehabilitate damaged or destroyed buildings. So one of the biggest takeaways from this webinar, I hope, is to understand unmet needs and communicating the unmet needs to your local EOC and the power of mission tasking. Whenever you have an emergency and you have an unmet need, you have to communicate that to your local EOC. If the county cannot meet that unmet need, then that gets elevated to the state, and that's where it gets into what's called a mission task. And that's when the state can redirect resources to help schools solve problems. We've been using this to help a lot of districts. We listed the flow of information that generally happens basically from the local level all the way up to the state. For us in schools, it's you working with your local EOC to communicate clearly your unmet need. And if the county can meet that unmet need, then it goes up to the state and resources can be made available. Very important to understand that. That's how the state can come in and help you meeting your unmet needs. In terms of school facilities, really quickly, depending on your situation, when you have damaged or destroyed facilities, you may have immediate needs. Obviously, we're in a different time now where we have distance learning opportunities, because it's always going to be critical to get the students back with their teachers as soon as possible. This has always been a priority. It's going to continue to be a priority. Now we may have additional opportunities through distance learning, but some of you may not. Some of you may have in-person instruction, and finding additional space immediately is critical. Now, one of the things that we would like to note is that looking at facilities that haven't been impacted, other schools within your district should be your first look to see if you have additional space. If you don't, neighboring districts to see if they have additional space. We've even looked at the community colleges. And the reason is because we want to try and get students into a classroom setting, into a school setting that's been designed for student use. If not, then we may run out of options, and we may have to consider other facilities. We've had to do this before. We did this during the car fire, and certainly with the campfire, where we had to go beyond school facilities to find immediate space. In these cases, we may be able to work with our CalOES partners, work with the governor's office to see if we can use facilities that are not typically suitable for students. There's a lot of laws that require students to be in certain types of buildings. I'm talking about the Field Act and some other requirements, but given the specifics of an emergency, we may be able to help and find other solutions through an executive order. Again, these are immediate needs and to get the students back to their teachers. Then you may have short-term needs. Tad mentioned this. We I think broke records in dropping portables in school campuses to help meet an immediate need. And it takes a lot of coordination, but know that the state and our agency partners and even our federal partners are here to help. And that's what we do when we get into these disasters. We pull together resources, we do what we can to help to meet and address problems and find quick solutions. And then if you do have interim housing needs to drop portables, that might be just during the time that you have to rebuild. And rebuilding is a whole nother component of the recovery process. And there's going to be a lot of coordination, working with your insurance companies, working with the state for potential state funding and federal funding assistance. But the key is that the state is here to help and trying to help you solve problems. We've all encountered a lot of different problems during these emergencies that we've never encountered before. But pulling all together and working together as a team has been critical. We've been able to find a lot of solutions. Next, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa to talk about funding and instructional time.
Thank you, Juan. So just to loop back on this a little bit, I won't get into detail. These are some frequently asked questions that we have on our webpage, but we have been talking about funding since we started our webinar today. So one thing I just wanted to point out that due to SB 98 this year, funding is held harmless. So funding is based on our 1920 reported ADA. And there is still an instructional day requirement for this year as well. So Juan, if you can go to the next slide for me, please. So what I wanted to just emphasize here is that even though ADA is held harmless for this year, you do still need to submit a J13A request because there is an instructional day requirement. Now, the difference here is that that process is the same that you've always gone through, and several of you already have this experience, unfortunately. But what this will mean is once you have a J13A approved, it will actually be for your funding for the 2021 school year. So it will be to actually prevent an audit finding in next year's school year, because this year's your funding is held harmless. So that's just the one distinction I wanted to make as we're talking about the J13A process and the implications of funding for school closures this year. So we've had some requests about making our slides available. We'll definitely send those. I think we have sent them ahead of time, but we can make those available to anyone who's interested in our slide deck. Thank you for having us here today, and we're open to any questions that you have.
Well, Lisa and Juan, I can't thank you guys enough. And Juan, you've been such a steady force down there, so calm and helpful. I don't know what all of us wouldn't have done without your leadership and getting the right answers. But to both of you, I don't think there's any dumb question, right? I think people that are new, especially these superintendent principals that are doing everything, it's always good to ask, and you guys always find, if they can't find an answer, you go get one. So I don't know if that's a question or just there's no dumb question during a crisis, because you just never know. And really appreciate your guys' slide deck. That's very helpful. This whole presentation is going to be so valuable for so many people, not only in California, but throughout the country. I'm very excited that we're recording this. So thank you both for your leadership and for being there for our schools and our teachers and kids. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We're going to switch agenda just a little bit and head over to Paradise. Tom Taylor is going to give us about 5 or 10 minutes. Tom, you know, we always talk about the real work is after the fires are put out and the lengthy recovery and restoration process. And your leadership since the campfires has been so outstanding. And welcome, and thanks for speaking to our districts that are dealing. As you can kind of reflect back on those days, they're about in their 10th day of dealing with the fires, and you know that was a very tough stage too. So thanks for being here, and thanks to Sheila for joining you in the back. She's been very valuable helping out the little districts answer some questions. So welcome, Tom. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some things that will hopefully help everybody out. I want to start off just by, I see so many faces on this meeting today, and I think back to all the support that we received and are still receiving is the reality of it. And I just want to say thank you to so many, I can't even begin to name, I mean, just so many people I'm looking at here. And I see some smiles and everybody knows who they are. So kind of leading into one of the things that I've heard a couple times is you can't do this by yourself. So be sure to reach out to people, and I'll talk about that a little more later, but that is key. Everything still continues. It's we're dealing with COVID right now. Everything that happened before is still going on. Now you have COVID, now you have the fire. So you can't do this by yourself, and I'm speaking to those superintendents and districts, whatever it might be. Reach out for help, and there's lots of people that will help you. I know anybody here in Butte County will be more than willing to answer any questions and support you. The people at the state were wonderful and are still wonderful. So starting off, I just want to say, be sure that you're reaching out to people. I know we're kind of back in 10 day, it's about the 10-day mark, and I pulled up some of our old notes and was looking at them and some of the things that we did in the very beginning. And I want to go back, and some people might be past this stage, but it's some critical pieces that I think are real important for everybody. And Mary was talking about the HR side of things earlier. And one of the things is having a process in place to locate your staff. And the phone tree was mentioned earlier. You might have gotten away from the phone tree when you got emails, when you get whatever other means of communication you might be using. But it's important to have that in place, because you have to find out where all your staff are. That's key. You also have to find out where all your students are. And we're in a district, we had about 3,400 students before the fire. Now we're down to about 1,570, 1,580. So right after the fire, our attendance went down to our ADA was cut in half. So we had to find out where those kids are. And I really liked what Steve said about, we don't need to stress the kids out. We don't need to stress the parents out. We received a lot of, in our district, we had, if people aren't aware, we had 4 of our schools were destroyed. All but 1 school was damaged. We ended up being able to use our 2 schools in Magalia before the year ended. We had about 400 employees, 190 employees had lost their homes, and 80 of our employees were displaced, another 80. Our whole district became homeless in about 5 hours. So it was, people were scattered and they were all over the place. So a key thing for us was having a system in place where people contacted one another. And it really started with, the district office, the cabinet contacting administrators, reaching out to teachers, and letting that whole chain of communication work. And then our teachers reaching out to our students. So that was a key thing. People were looking for a sense of normalcy and some type of stability in the times. Remember, many of our people, and in your guys' case, they just lost everything. So they're not just dealing with trauma, they're dealing with the loss. They lost their home, they lost their friends, they lost their school. I mean, they lost a lot of connections. So a key thing here is not just the trauma, but also the loss that people experienced. So really key that we have people, a chain or a process in place to reach out and be sure that we know where everybody is. And that's not an easy task. It wasn't easy, but it needs to happen. Kind of similar as communication. I think Juan mentioned about looking at your plan each year, your safety plan. And I will tell you what, we did not have enough communication the day of the fire. We lost communications during the fire. The best thing we had was cell phones, and that started breaking down. So be sure that you have some type of emergency radio system in place. That you're gonna have to have a repeater somewhere, and you're probably gonna need a backup to that. And that's something that we're working on, is beefing it up in our district. So that's kind of goes with the day of the fire. But the other part of it is you need to be sure, Mary mentioned that they were doing the briefing meetings and they were very helpful. And it needs to happen at the district level also. We need to be sure that you have a consistent message going out to your staff and a consistent message going out to families. They are looking for that calmness. And if we are giving different messages, it just creates additional confusion. And we didn't know what we were doing all the time, to be quite honest with you, but we had to try and look like we knew what we were doing. And so getting a consistent message at your staff, I mean, Facebook now, everybody has access to the media now. So we had to be sure our staff were receiving frequent updates, messages, and things that we wanted to be shared. So it was going out to the public in all different types of media. As far as yourself, you can be out there, take every chance you can to meet with the news agencies to get your message out. We had a lot of our teachers, and this makes you cringe in some cases, but I think nothing is normal. We had our teachers meeting our students at CalSPRA, the skating rink, and they would come in and they would meet at the coffee shops with some of our older kids. I had one teacher, once again, this makes you a little nervous, but I had one teacher call her students and they had a picnic with the family and the students at the teacher's house. I mean, so people were reaching out in just about every way we could. And the key there was that you were helping people make those connections. It's real difficult now. I think of what you guys are dealing with COVID-19. One of the best things for the healing was that we were able to make connections with people. And it's not as easy right now to make those connections. Some of the small districts, you might find it very beneficial if you can, meet in some large area where you can do social distancing, but just so people can see that people are there. Seeing that face is a very important thing. Counseling. Thank goodness we had the support of Butte County Office of Ed in helping provide us counseling. I want to be clear that academics becomes way down the line. It's not your priority. And you are going to have staff that were impacted by the fire, lost everything, and you will have staff that were impacted, such as some of our staff in neighboring communities, who are more ready to jump back into school, and they want to get on the academics piece. And it's all done from the right place. They're all doing it because they want to help. They want to help their kids. But academics isn't the priority at this point. It's really the social emotional healing that people are going to have to go through, and it's going to take a while for that to happen. As much counseling as you can get, you're going to need more. You need it for your staff as well as the students. What we found out is that our staff wanted to come back. They rallied and they wanted to help everybody, but it was when the adrenaline was still pumping, and everybody, and then all of a sudden they hit a wall, and it was really tough for our staff to go out and help those students. And I think it was Tim that mentioned early, victims helping victims. And that's what we were faced with. So have that counseling in place that your staff can touch base with. We had multiple people come and present to our whole staff whenever possible. So they knew that their feelings were okay. It's okay to feel the way you do. It's okay to be standing there and all of a sudden be overcome with emotions, and let the staff know that it's part of the healing process. Otherwise, they feel like it's not the way it's supposed to be. I've been pushing since the fire that we pick up something called KFC, kindness, forgiveness, and compassion, because during this time, everybody's going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to be a little on edge, and you might find somebody, I might lash out at somebody when I normally wouldn't, and I have to hope that they'll forgive me as I would forgive them also. So just sharing the messages, that everybody's going through different emotions. You have the people that are ready to get on board, and those people who just can't right now. I was talking about having our teachers call their students. There were some teachers that couldn't do that. It just wasn't something they could do. So we connected with our classified staff, or other teachers picked up their classes and just helped them make those phone calls, because the phone calls alone were just too much for them at that point in time. So there was a lot of conversation about getting help, and you need additional support, and you need, and from the cabinet level, you need additional support for you too. You can't, I mentioned you can't do it all earlier. We get support for our staff, we get support for our students, but sometimes we forget about our administrators and the cabinet level people. They don't only need help in the counseling piece, but they also need help for people to do the work. We had people who were working strictly with FEMA. It was mentioned earlier that we had people coming in from outside the district that were hired. We had Susan Stetzenegger, who came in and helped our CBO. We had Susan Davis, who came in and helped with HR and just about everything else you could think of. We had Dave Scott. I think that's who you were referring to earlier, Mary, come in and really helping us. He was helping us find locations, as well as helping us just organize the moving students around and everything. We had Matt, Scott, and Roy as part of the counseling team, and many others who were brought in to support. And Tad mentioned earlier that it seems a little odd to spend so much money when you don't have it, but if you don't, you won't make it. I mean, there's so much going on. You have to get the support that you need. We had Kendra, who came in and was helping us with communications. We had other districts that were helping us set up locations to not only teach kids, but for us to meet. So really getting out there and reaching out to ask for help, because you can't do it alone. The safety plan. we felt like we had a pretty decent safety plan in place. And I got a call sometime during that morning when we evacuated Ridgeview to the CMA church, which is about 2 miles down the road. I get a call from the site administrator who tells me, okay, the CMA church is on fire. What now, Tom? You know, and about that time, somewhere Tim was on the line saying, what do you need? And I said, we have to send our kids down to the fairgrounds. And that really wasn't part of our safety plan. Should have been, but you don't think that you're going to have to evacuate completely to another town. And that's what we did. Thank goodness we had a good process in place for families to reconnect at that point in time. And we got a couple real lead administrators down there who put people on that, and that went pretty well. So in your safety plan, go back and review that plan and think of it's got to be beyond your town. And many of you might have already done that. We didn't have that in place. So review the processes with everybody involved, because when it happens, well, it's not the time to be learning the process. So all the practices that you guys do, they're not a waste of time.
Hey Tom, I got to interrupt because we got to move on, but I want to let the people know it's your heroic leadership that really is the key to the communications and the steadiness, right? Your belief in your people, and especially I would say the work with your school board was imperative. They lost their homes, and we're seeing this now over in other districts where the board members have been displaced, and yet they've got to step up and lead. And you guys worked, I thought, hand in hand very well in the most of difficult situations. And Sheila had been there the whole time. I think the one thing we underestimate is the executive assistant is critical for your sanity and the district's well-being. And I think in some cases that gets a lot of pressure on a support team to keep everything in line. But I can't thank you enough, because every time I see you, I get choked up, because I know you're hanging in there and you're in it for the long haul, which is going to still be, I think, a decade process for Paradise. And I think people need to know it's not going to, like Steve says, it doesn't turn around in 1 year. It's going to take years to do. For all of you out there, Tom's always available to help. Sheila's there to connect if you need to talk about district level stuff, especially, I think, Tom, the role of these board members who are so traumatized themselves and care so much about their community. It's tough, but I want to thank you for being here. We got to move on because we got 2 other presentations and people's time's short. But Tom, thanks so much. And Sheila, thanks for being there. You guys are awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to CSEA and CTA, and we have Karen and Mark here, and I really appreciate it. I think the one thing that was a relief for Butte County, and I think Steve would say the same, but especially Butte, we knew that the labor was going to support our people and take care of them, that we didn't have time a lot to deal with the work that they did. So Mark, thanks for being here. I'll start with you. I know teachers are probably bombarding you guys all over the state, and can you tell them what CTA has to offer our members, and let the admin know too, so we can get that word out?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having a teacher perspective in the mix here today. I'm Mark Mitchell. I'm the regional UNISERV staff here in Sonoma County, 1 and 2. So I was here through the 3 years of fires and all of that we've had recently. I wanted to make folks aware of the CTA Disaster Relief Fund, which is available for all members, student members, so it can be at the JC or the university level, active members employed by the district, and also retired members. So those folks that may have retired but have maintained their membership through the retiree chapter. And the fund applications need to go generally through the local president of the association in the district. So you guys know who that person may be. If they're not there or they've evacuated, the regional UNISERV staff assigned to your geographic area would be also a person that could approve these grants. So it's just to have somebody locally saying, yes, this person works in this area suffered, catastrophic loss, and they're eligible, right? In the Paradise situation, it was all coordinated out of Chico, the Chico Regional Resource Center. Here in Sonoma County, all of this was coordinated through our Santa Rosa Regional Resource Center. There's 4 types of grants that are available. The first one is for $1,500. It's called the standard grant. And that's available to members who have suffered more than a 5% loss in the replacement cost of their homes, right? So it could be, you know, as minor as an outbuilding burned down in the rural areas, or one room or a roof. It doesn't have to be a total loss. In addition, mandatory evacuation for over 15 days will qualify, or no utilities for over 15 days. So we know a lot of people in rural areas live on wells. They don't have electricity. They can't stay at home. So this is intended to provide relief for, you know, motels, hotels, things like that. If a member qualifies for that standard grant and they have more losses than the 5%, an additional $1,500 is available through a catastrophic damage grant. And that is for damage over $50,000 to the home or total loss, right? So we had a lot of people, we had over 200 members in the 2017 fires whose homes were completely burned down. So they qualified for the total $3,000 of those 2 grants. The folks that are not quite as affected might qualify for a temporary displacement grant. It's $500 for anybody who has suffered a mandatory evacuation for more than 5 days. So we know we have hundreds of members here in Sonoma County who are going to qualify for this, just based on the, you know, over a week of mandatory evacuations that Dr. Harrington referenced in about 7 of our districts here. The school site grant is also available to educators whose school site burns down. Or is damaged by smoke or whatever, so that they can replace those educational materials that they have at the school site. In addition, those CTA members who might have California Casualty, which is our kind of affiliated home and auto insurance carrier, they also provide a benefit to members for losses at the school site. So they would have 2 sources of funds to replace things lost at the school. And just on the you know, some of the mentions of backpacks and, you know, things that folks have come up with, physical items, the CTA teachers and their union really stepped up in 2017 here in Sonoma County, and we accepted all that stuff. A lot of the districts were closed or they weren't able to accept it. Like Dr. Harrington said, it's hard to kind of coordinate all that. We received and distributed over 900 backpacks, and I can't tell you how many other supplies, but our office was packed to the ceiling. People were driving up from San Francisco and Oakland and mailing boxes from Fresno. And we took all of that, we sorted it. The members came in during the, you know, as soon as we could, sorted it, and then put out online lists to the educators so that our members could identify those schools and students most in need, and we could distribute it directly to the families and to students. And we had many days where students came to us, and then other times where we were you know, taking things out to the school sites, and that went on for weeks. Anything that was left that we couldn't use, we donated to Goodwill or whatever. Also, the CTA State Council of Education, our state governance board, collected, you know, I don't know, thousands and thousands of dollars from teachers that were then distributed in addition to these grants. And the Santa Rosa Teachers Association used a significant part of its strike fund to give micro grants to teachers that had losses, but they didn't qualify for one of these larger grants from CTA. So teachers step up in these situations. The union CTA is on the ground working throughout these disasters. And so those of you in administration, you know, please be aware of that and direct CTA members to access those grants and services. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. And I think the biggest resource would be someone like yourself. Teachers, if your teachers are really struggling with getting back on their feet, I would call another teacher, and Mark will be very available to help, because you can hear it in their voices. They're too exhausted right now to do distance learning. So get some help and get the support you need. Hey, Karen, nice to see you from CSEA. Welcome, and Classify was another big help. They really supported Mary and all her work in the recovery in Butte. I'm sure Steve will say the same. You got a couple programs for our classified staff, I hear.
Yes, and Tim, thank you so much for having CSEA on the call today so we could share some of the resources we have available to our members. We operate the Dorothy Bjork Assistance Fund, similar to CTAs, where our members can apply for assistance if their home has been deemed uninhabitable for any reason. This can be because of evacuation, fire, flood, any natural disaster. So currently with this crisis that we are facing with our state, we have assisted 42 members across the state from all the various fires with help getting them some funds into their bank account for evacuations. We've heard from some of these members on their applications that they're living out of their car because they had nowhere to evacuate to. So with these funds, we can get them into a hotel room for the night, somewhere safe to rest their head with them and their family. Since we're also sharing some best practices on how we can connect with everyone to assist, we want to share what CSEA has done during this crisis in difference to some of the other fires that we've had. As Steve shared earlier in the call, we've unfortunately become very good and very organized at our fire support ever since the Tubbs fire, and fires have gotten worse across the state of California. So we used to reach out to our members by email to see if we could get a hold of them, let them know that these funds are available for assistance, and we would get a moderate return on that. With the Paradise Fire, we assisted over 300 members, many of them who had full losses. But what we did this time, since we knew we were all sheltering in place because of the pandemic, we couldn't go to evacuation sites to find our members, is we actually embarked on a text message campaign. So we used Hustle to reach out to over 17,000 members in the course of one day to let them know that these funds and services are available. From that, we had 6,700 members reach back out to us, say, thank you for reaching out. We are okay. We appreciate the outreach, but let them know that the information is there in case they do get evacuation orders later. And then also from that, we had over 1,000 members reach back out to from the text messages saying that they do need assistance, that they are currently evacuated, and we were able to get them the link to the online application so that they can apply. So some of these technological advances have helped not just for political campaigns or anything else we have in the future, but also for our humanitarian and emergency efforts. So we wanted to make sure we shared that here today for anyone watching this webinar. And we, again, thank you for having labor at the table here today to share some of this, and please direct any classified school employees to CSEA and we'll be more than happy to assist them. We have a call center of staff that's taking applications, and our turnaround time right now is about 24 hours between the time of receiving an application to getting funds directly deposited into a member's account to assist them during this crisis.
Gosh, that's fantastic. You should run payroll for everybody while you're at it. That's great. I love your logo, by the way. I'm in, and thank both of you so much. It really does provide a sense of relief for people struggling, and people usually, especially educators, are afraid to ask. So we'll keep pushing out the message. So thanks both of you for being here. And we'll wrap up with probably our most important, all of you guys are important, but communications is absolutely key. And I would say Tom and Mary would agree with me that when we brought Kendra in to support Paradise, it was a game changer, because you have to tell your story and get your message out. And Kendra, your work that you did coming up from Placer County as the PIO was fantastic. And if you could share a few thoughts, we got about 8 minutes. So you could share a few thoughts on communication and the work of CalSPRA to help out these people that are really struggling to communicate right now.
Yes, thank you. Although I work for CDE as my day job, I'm wearing my other hat as the current past president of CalSPRA. I'm in my 5th year as an elected board member, so I'm proud to represent this association. It's a volunteer organization. It comprises of over 500 members across the state, district, county office, consultants, even associations, communication folks. And then we are divided up with 7 regional chairs. And so I just kind of wanted to give a little background on what CalSPRA is, and then some quick examples of how we can be supportive and a resource to you. So as I mentioned, I'm on the board. I grew up in rural Nevada County, so I've been living fire seasons my whole life. But the ways that we've helped, as you can imagine, communication is key. If you haven't figured that out yet, you know, it comes pretty quickly. If you don't have something in place, the need for it will quickly arise as you're in the midst of it. So one thing, you know, it's key to communicate using your website, evacuation, information that you need to just get out. It's also important to control your message, because the media, as I'm sure you've noticed, takes a huge interest in what's going on. And sadly, the reality is, as soon as a big traumatic event happens, staff are losing homes, students are losing homes, your school sites are burning down, the media's interest increases. And so one of the things that I personally helped with in Camp Fire was to, I was first brought into Butte County, and then they said, you know, Paradise needs their own person to just kind of navigate that. So I jumped in and just tried to help, you know, as an outsider. I think that was probably what was helpful, is because even though I was emotionally tied to the fire, because it's devastating and traumatic, I wasn't as in it as the staff and the personnel who were experiencing evacuations themselves, navigating, trying to find students and staff. So you kind of come in and bring an outside perspective, maybe some, you know, a fresh set of eyes to people who are just exhausted. So it certainly helped with Camp Fire. We also brought in extra folks from our association to help on the first day of school, December 3rd, when we reopened sites. As you can imagine, the media interest for that was huge. And so we needed to staff and just to kind of help, you know, set limits and parameters to protect our kids who are coming back to school for the first day. So we were able to help in that way. We've helped with Trona when the earthquakes hit. Again, I said we're broken up into 7 regional chairs. So sometimes, you know, it's easier to just say, hey, you know, your regional chair for that county is this person, and we'll connect you and we can provide resources. In normal times, we would be happy to volunteer and help. We're a little spread thin right now because we are a volunteer and we all have day jobs that are extremely demanding, with one issue on top of another, compounded, you know, pandemic with fire season. But we have messaging, you know, again, communication is key. You want to control your message. The rumor mill gets out. You want to be the site where information's, you know, we have rumors, oh, I heard this site, I heard this, I heard that. You want to be the source of information. So whether that's your website, social media was huge for Paradise, because as they, you know, previously mentioned, you know, people were evacuated. So how are you going to get to people on the go that are displaced? And so, you know, mobile phones, what do they have access to in that way? So thinking of new ways to communicate with families that was different from prior, and just getting it out. And every time we shared information on the Paradise Facebook page, it just got shared exponentially out. But that was ideal because we controlled that message, and that's the message we wanted to be shared out. So I'll be quick, I know we're wrapping up, but CalSPRA as an association is very collaborative. We share everything. We know people are out there on their own, or may not even have a communications person designated. It may be somebody who wears other hats as well. So if CalSPRA can be of any help, we have template messaging. It's all cloud-based, as we learned quickly in other situations too, that you need to have cloud-based messaging ready to go. So we have template messaging. And we also have consultants, if you need more long-term help, that are members of our association, that can be hired, that aren't necessarily tied to a specific district or COE right now, that might have more bandwidth than some of our members. But just want to be helpful if there's anything we can share. I've got list upon list of things that I saved from Paradise, even just navigating media, but they won't go away. And with Paradise, I had never experienced media interest for as long as they stayed in the Chico area. And then as new developments were coming up, we were reopening schools, or we were reopening the new high school, the interest comes back. So having somebody to help navigate that and to take that off the superintendent's plate, that's one of the first things I did. I think I introduced myself to Michelle John, and then I said, I'm going to set an out of office on your email that directs any media inquiries to me. And it's the first thing I did. And just taking that off her plate, so she wasn't bombarded, you know, it just inundated with all sorts of requests. And then the next thing was to get volunteer donations figured out, and how to have somebody specifically working on that, because that can be overwhelming and you have so many other things to be worrying about, including how you're personally affected. So if CalSPRA can help in any way, our website is calspra.org. You can seek somebody in your regional chair, but I'd be happy to navigate that. Like I said, I'm the current past president, so I'm on my 5th year on my 5-year term. So I'm happy to connect you. Again, we have over 500 members across the state, so we can be of value and service. So thanks for having us here.
Thanks, Kendra. And back to Steve and Mary, I think get in front of the camera as a county soup or district soup is imperative for clear communication where you're at. And there's a lot of people, I think the big difference between today and I think maybe even 2017, 2018 is let me read some stats to everybody before we close. There's 16,000 firefighters fighting fire since August 15th, 2,200 fire engines, 354 water tenders, 304 dozers, 14,000 lightning strikes, 875 new wildfires that have taken out 1.5 million acres, and 7 reported fatalities with 2,800 structures. So we're only in this for about 2 weeks, and you can see the breadth of this. It's not like it's in one county where everybody can help. We're in so many counties. So for all you out there dealing with this, this video will go national. We'll send it to the national rural because they're interested in it. But statewide, please ask for help. Thanks to everybody who participated today. It was great to see everyone, and thanks for all your input. This is a great hour and a half for everyone as we deal with more wildfires in 2020. So stay safe, and happy Monday to everybody, and talk to you guys soon. Take care.
Bye, everybody.